Is it somehow that latent in our language are all the ideas that we ever will have or have had? And so the ability to combine our language and process it through whatever it is the computer does will eventually come up with the results, which we may not have experienced yet because of our biologically limited experience of time. Right? But the
I,
machine might not
I
experience.
I'm going to add the Akashic Record, which has gotten different names in different places, where what you just said, past, present, and future, are all recorded. I don't think the future one is ever certain. I think it's all probabilistic that they've got up there because you know something, human beings, we got to face something. We got some free will going on here. We
Well,
can
we
make
think we
some.
do.
Pardon?
We think we
Pardon?
do. We think we have
Well,
free will.
if we don't think we do, then we just may as well sit here and watch television. Uh,
Right.
it, we got to pretend. And the reason why, and I'm working with a guy who's written the scientific view of free will, and he said, yeah, everything is all programmed. It's all got detailed, worked out, but it's so complicated that we can't be able to predict ourselves. It's worked out, but we can't predict what's going to happen because we cannot get to the details that will tell us because the details keep shifting with time, within the instant. So we have to act as if we have free will. To Connecting with Coincidence, I am your host, Bernie Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist. My new book, which is covers on the wall back there, a life-changing Synchronicities, is coming out in a few weeks. Hope you take a look at it. Be talking about it in future episodes. But today, the question is, you ever wonder about religious epiphanies? You know, where like Moses and the burning bush, he encountered a burning bush that was not consumed by flames, and God was telling him, I am that I am, not a noun, but a verb, which is an important distinction among those who study this with some detail. And he was told to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. The Ten Commandments, another example of how that happened on Mount Sinai. Most religions include stories involving encounters that might be interpreted through a contemporary lens, where divine messengers like angels or even God could be analogous to non-human intelligence, NHI, which are described in modern UFO encounters. And some theorists argue that religious epiphanies and paranormal experiences may represent early interactions with advanced non-human entities. And you can see I'm on this with a very, very intelligent, deeply committed man named Brannon Wheeler. And Brannon is a historian of religion who's been over 30 years studying religions, ancient texts, and paranormal phenomenon. He's been all over the world, and he's very scholarly, looking at texts in different languages and being able to read them. 11 books has been the result of a lot of that, and currently he is focused on how non-human intelligence communicate with humans, which is something that we have to keep paying yet more attention to here on among us. So, Brannon, welcome to the show, and I'm delighted to be able to talk with you about non-human intelligent communication.
Well, thank you, Bernie. It was a pleasure to meet you just a short while ago in person, and just the opportunity to talk with you and to talk about this topic. I'm very excited.
Wonderful. And as we were talking before we started recording, I'm working on a book that involves the collective human organism, psychotherapy for the collective human organism. And I'm suggesting, yes, we're all in this together, but we're all cells in this thing, and we got to coordinate. And part of the coordination comes from the mind of the collective human organism. We've got one. it's kind of scattered and all over the place. And I try to be able to describe how we have to organize that. And one way to organize that is through the collective self-observer. Just like you can observe your own mind, the collective mind is developing the capacity to observe its own mind. And it's not only observe our own minds, but it becomes a portal or a conduit to non-human intelligence. And with that, I turn it over to Brannon.
That's a that's a very intriguing and challenging thing to respond to. And I'm fascinated by the way you described it, because to fill in a little bit of the background of what you did when you introduced me, it's true that I've been studying, um, although I didn't know it, I've been studying non-human intelligence interaction with humans for more than 3 decades. It's just that I used to think of that as the study of ancient religion. Um, and I did a lot of work with reading, particularly about the Bible and the Quran and other revealed text. And I've always been fascinated by the scholarship, which normally occurs like the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, among Muslims and Jews primarily, although Christians do it a little bit too, um, talking about like how did these texts get revealed, um, and asking really practical questions like, well, if God's speaking to humans, is God using human language? Is he doing it telepathically? How does all that work? And he must understand how the neurons or the quantum brain works, right? When he does all that stuff. And I've always been fascinated by the idea of how revelation and prophecy and how all of that works. And so recently, when I've always been interested also in science fiction and UFOs and all that. And more recently, I realized that I could do some of that stuff professionally. I could study UFOs and people who'd seen UFOs. And it was at that point that I realized, and maybe it's a synchronicity, that that the people I speak with who have contact experiences are basically subject matter experts in what I've been studying all of this time. So I can't interview Moses and ask him what it was like, or Muhammad or whatever. But I can talk to an experiencer, and they can tell me their story. And sometimes they get frustrated by interrupt them as soon as they tell me that they got a message. Like, oh, how did you get the message? Did the NHI speak to you? Did you hear it with your ears? And so I started keeping track of all of the answers I get from all of that. Um, and so I think that might be a way of actually looking at that collective mind, right? Because we are observing our collective mind from these different perspectives, the individual perspectives, and many of the people that in the ancient world who had religious epiphanies, but also people in the contemporary context who are in contact with as you called them NHI, um, are are saying that they're in contact with something that's collective, right? That this isn't just an individual one-on-one experience. Um,
They're in contact with something they're saying is collective,
yes.
and they're not talking about the collective human mind, are they?
No, no, so well, it's interesting because even the way you put it, I think would be accurate description for how it's being described to me, which is sometimes people will say, kind of on one end, the entities with which I was speaking were collective, and I can give you some examples in maybe in a minute of that. But also on the other end of that, people telling me that the communication with them was from a collective, that included them, right? So that somehow they were communicating with themselves through, and the source was this collective mind that you're talking about. So people often, experiencers often um, have vision, probably not the right word, but I'm going to use it, but have a vision or experience of their future self. So even there's a connection between their temporally bound mind, in the context in which they're having the experience, and then the experience itself. Um, So I've been the way you put it about the collective self-observer mind being a conduit, um, is absolutely correct. And now
Huh.
whether what the reality is behind that is always open to question, right? We don't know that. We can talk to people, we can ask them, we can theorize, but that's what makes it kind of interesting to study, right? Because we don't actually know what the answer is.
Yeah, we don't know who's who in this thing, uh, but what you're doing, and I find so important and fascinating, is asking, well, how is it that these communications take place?
Yeah.
What is the language? What is the form of communication? Is it spoken words? God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, supposedly,
Yeah.
but speaking, is it telepathic? You wonder. I have communication with trees, and there's three of them that I've had communication with for 15 years now. I go up in the forest, and they like me to sing to them, and they tell me things, and they've been pretty good advisors sometimes. And it's telepathic. I get it as words from them. And sometimes I ask them, how does that happen? How do I get it this way? And they're kind of sneaky about it, but they say they kind of translate it from some other thing into a language that I then can understand.
So they're doing the translation for you.
They're doing the translation for me.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point because I know when we talked when we were at DOPS, um, one of my points there was that language is always about status, and a lot of in fact, there's very few experiences that I can think of where whether it's a religious epiphany or a NHI, UFO, whatever you want to call it, where the human is in the position of authority. It's usually the NHI who is superior, which can do the translation for you, or has studied all human languages and so can speak in whatever language you need to have, right? Or knows what you've experienced in your life, so can relate that to you using symbols or logic, and all of that makes sense. Um, I've mentioned before one of my favorite scholars is Maimonides, the Rambam, the famous
Yes.
medieval scholar.
Yes.
And he talks quite a bit about how God had to use um, imagery or figurative language, as he puts it, that humans could understand. Humans at that time could understand, right? So he wouldn't have he may have communicated the Torah differently if it were today. Um, and you wonder whether what those two would look like, right? If you had a Torah from today and a Torah from back then. We know that it was re-revealed to Ezra, about 1,000 years later. So maybe it was different that time. We don't know.
Maybe it was, but you're making such an important point about communication. That point is one, yeah, of the dominant the one who's in control, but but along with that, the speaker, to be effective, needs to be reading the mind of the listener,
Mhm.
needs to know how that listener is and will respond to what the speaker is saying.
Yes.
That And that's what you're implying. And I'm trying to say that out loud because in human communication, we miss the mind of the other person on a regular basis. And it's one of the major flaws that I'm trying to address in this book about psychotherapy for the collective human organism, that we need to be learning how to read, feel, know, experience the mind of the other as we are talking to that other person. And
Mhm.
you're making that point about the entities.
Yes. And so it's interesting to consider, um, although we do it all the time, how that communication works when the human is the one who has the advantage, right? So like I mean, we have pets, right? So we talk to our dogs, and
Yes, we
we
do.
assume that we know, far more than our dog knows, and the dog usually is like, "No, I'm not going to listen to you. I know better," you know. And you're like, "No, but I know, you shouldn't do that. That's not good." So we have the experience ourselves, but I don't think we often turn that around and think, well, gee, is that's what's happening to me when this being talks to me? Is the being speaking to me like a dog or like an ant or like looking at me like a molecule in a microscope or something? What level of what scale? I mean, just in imagining a God that's beyond human comprehension communicating with humans. I mean, that's kind of the point of religion, right? At least the
Yeah.
biblical,
Yeah.
like how could this God possibly, so since we can't on our own know this being, the being has to reveal itself to us. And so how does that work? Right. And Christianity just solves it simply. It's like, well, just became a person. And then we just talk to the person, right? Because that's they God then understands what it's like to be a person, and we can relate to that person. Um, but with Maimonides, and particularly with like Judaism, right, regarding the text as the primary vehicle, language is so important.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
relationship between the speaker and the listener, if like you said, Moses got some information at the burning bush, but at that point, did he know Hebrew? Because he'd been raised in the courts of Egypt. Was he speaking Egyptian? And then did God start to speak to him in Hebrew? And he's like, what is this bush saying? I don't understand.
Let's for this time, you're asking the good academic question. Let's say that whatever that entity was, and we don't have to call it God, we can call it an emissary from some higher intelligence. We can call it whatever we want, but it knows the mind of the
Yeah,
person it is speaking to.
yeah.
And to give my analogy with the trees
Mhm.
that you're bringing up more clearly, twice. The forest, the whole thing, told me to get out of there and stay away for 6 weeks.
Hmm.
Uh, and uh, I was really crushed because I loved going out there and hanging around with those guys. So after a while, when I came back first time, I said, "What? So how come you kicked me out of here?" And they said, "You're using us too much with all your thinking. It's wearing us out. It's too much." You need to appreciate how beautiful we are instead of just thinking with us or just doing this. Okay. So the next time they kicked me out, I came back and they said, "You're hanging around with us too much. You need to be more social." These are both examples of the hierarchy you're talking about, where
Yeah.
they were a higher intelligence telling me like as if I were my dog, except my grand dog Walter is the boss in his family, and everybody knows that. That
Yeah.
happens sometimes. So this hierarchy is really important, and the idea that the speaker can turn the language into something the person can understand. It's really funny what you said about Christianity. Well, we're just making a person. And there's so many people who are mediums who are speaking. And there's so many religious people now who say they're speaking for God. And how do you know they're just not making it up themselves? Becomes an important question. And how do you think about that question? How do you validate when you what you don't know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think that we as social beings, we have a tendency to think hierarchically.
Yes.
It could actually be that it's not as hierarchical as we think it is, that it's far more cooperative. As you're saying, if like even if I'm speaking with you virtually, it's much more difficult for me to, as you put it, read your mind and read what how you're hearing what I'm saying. Um, and I think that the person whose mind is being read, so to speak, also has to participate in that, right?
Yes.
If I just kept a totally blank face, it would be very difficult for you to understand, am I getting through to him or not? I have that experience with my students all the time.
Yeah.
I'm looking around the room and I'm talking, and most of them just have this really blank face. And I just have to stop. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Ask really silly questions like, what color is that green flag? And they just look at you and you're not getting through to them at all. It's not working. So I think our social, our biological, um, our biological reality and also our social reality has a big effect on why we need to communicate, and then how we do it, and then of course how we understand it. And it could be the case, and I try to leave as many balls in the air as possible. I don't know what the answers are, but it could be the case that perhaps the NHI, whatever they are or might be, or it um, is actually trying to teach us something about language, about how we can communicate with one another, and that in fact we're looking at it wrong the way we're doing it. I mean, we know
That's
from I'm just going to say in the Bible. I was thinking about this the other day, right? Because Adam and Eve supposedly had direct communication with God, and walked around the garden with him and stuff. And then you've got that story about the Tower of Babel, where you literally have an NHI saying, "I'm sorry, I need to make it harder for you guys to communicate with each other because you're doing too well, right? You're cooperating too well, and you're gonna exceed where I want you to be. So I need to make it hard for you to talk to each other by literally confusing your languages so that you can't talk to one another."
I didn't know that about the babbling on. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
the humans were building this huge tower, and God's kind of reminiscent of what happens when Adam and Eve eat the fruit in the garden. God says, we can't let you stay here because you'll have access to the tree of life. Plus, you now have knowledge of good and evil, so you'll be like us. You'll be like gods. So you have to leave. And a very similar reasoning is used with the Tower of Babel story, where God is saying, and I don't remember whether it's Elohim or Yahweh or what the names are used, but yeah, look at the people down there. They're building this huge tower. They're going to reach our heights pretty soon. Their technology, their evolution, it's going too quickly. We need to slow them down. So let's confuse them by making them all speak different languages.
how do you understand the purpose of that communication?
It's a difficult one, um, right? Because I mean, well, there's a lot of things. One of them is why, how do we regard a God who does that to us?
Yeah.
Why is that a positive thing? What did we do to deserve that? And there are versions of the story, the Babel story, where people try to explain why God did that. And a lot of them involve this king named Nimrod, who also occurs in other stories in the Bible, who who actually shoots an arrow into heaven, and it comes back with blood on it. And it's like, uh-oh, so now they're getting close to threatening us, so we need to slow them down. But the people apparently didn't have the capacity when it happened to understand each other, so they couldn't talk about what had just happened. So they had to like start from scratch again. Like, oh, we can't, since I can't ask you to bring me that brick, I'd have to do it on my own. There's no way we can build a tower together anymore, right? We're going to have to split into different social, political communities, and then eventually compete with each other, right? Because we all speak different languages, and only much later in human history did we have through political conquest did we have a language that we call like Koine, right, for the Greek, or lingua franca, meaning everyone used French for a while, and now everyone's learning to speak English in some form or another. But through the political spread, and I guess maybe today through cultural and globalized trade and everything else.
Well, we need what surprises me, not having known the story, is what we need is a collective mind operating together.
We need to
And
reverse the Tower of Babel.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So there's something about it being too early for that to be able to be effective is all I can walk away from with that. That that we couldn't do what we were capable of doing, but I mean, what we could do is communicate and be together with our language, but we couldn't use it in a way that would be positive.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
my
Well, either that or
what
God just doesn't want us to reach its or their or his level.
well let's say we better get to that level or where we're going to destroy ourselves. Let's just
Right?
guess that one.
I think you're probably right.
So
Um,
this is So if God was interested in having us being around here, we need a little help right now to
Yeah.
because we're babbling on with all our different, not languages so much, but intentions. Like what we have now and what the gathering you and I were together with recently is working on changing the paradigm of materialistic science into something broader. Calling it non-materialism is wrong. It's not enough. It's a step in the direction post-materialist paradigm.
Yeah.
We need something else, and people are saying consciousness. And I don't know that that's a difficult word for a lot of people because it means a lot of different things. It could be better defined than it is right now. What I'm looking at is how practically we are part of the same organism. It's almost like how you're asking how uh, non-human intelligence communicate to us. There's a gap
Mhm.
that we want to be able to fill in. Is what is that language that they're speaking, or how do they know our minds enough to be able to communicate with us? Well, we have that same question here on Earth,
Right.
hierarchy and communication. And your work is raising a question that's fundamental right here on the planet. How do we communicate with each other in a more effective way?
I remember something one of my professors, my advisors from graduate school, he was talking about people who study like other ancient texts and things. And he said, well, people tell me it's so hard to translate this medieval Chinese text, and we're never kind of quite get it right. And then he would say, well, think about like English. Like we can't even read Beowulf because it's an earlier version of English. So earlier we don't even call it English. It's Anglo-Saxon, right? And even if we read something like Shakespeare and you read it with a critical edition, you'll see all the words you think you know down in the footnotes. It'll say, well, that word didn't actually mean that back then. It meant something different. And then he would go on to say that when you and I, even you and I, Bernie, when we're talking, we don't even know that we're communicating. So the point is that it's not any more difficult to read something that's in a foreign language. It's probably more difficult because you and I assume that we understand each other when we're talking because we're like, oh, we're using the same language, we're living in roughly the same place, we've had very similar experiences, we've got all points of contact. If you're reading something that's foreign, then you're thinking a great deal about what does that word mean? Like, why is the text telling me that? Or why did the person write it down? So there's a lot more intentionality in the communication than there is when we just naturally, and my favorite example is when I talk with my wife, who we've been together for more than 40 years, and we should perfectly understand each other all the time. But we don't, right? Because it has become too taken for granted that when we communicate, we don't think as much about what the other person is saying and what the intention might be and why we're saying what we're saying, because you just get relaxed and you're like, oh yeah, we know what we're talking about.
That's a beautiful example, Brannon. I'm advocating for an advance in the way we communicate, which includes not get just gets rid of language, but uses language as a conveyor belt into the mind of the other person, so that what I'm imagining, the movie I'm running in my mind, can be communicated to you in present and happens over Zoom with I can do it sometimes with people where I can see the movie they're running in their mind as they're narrating that movie so that I can have more visual because a picture is often worth 1,000 words. I can have more visual about what that other person is saying. However, you had brought up indirectly a very important point about the people who make connections with non-human intelligence. They have to be open to those connections and openness to your wife, You kind of have to make an assumption. A good friend of mine said he would do something with me on a podcast that was different from what we ever had done together, and he was interested in it. He never told his wife about it, and they live together quietly. They don't have much other contact except the grandchildren and daughter and son and daughter-in-law, and he still didn't tell his wife. That amazed me.
Yeah. I am I I think there is I think there's very good reason not to separate out NHI from religious experience. So if we want to call it contact experiences versus religious epiphanies, there's many reasons why we shouldn't differentiate between the two, that it's just all on some spectrum. And I also think that what you're saying is brilliant and insightful as well, which is we shouldn't we shouldn't separate out somebody who's translating, ancient languages and deciphering religious texts from people who are studying just language, just how people communicate with each other. Um, the if we think of communication between an NHI, whether it's God or an alien, and a human as something extraordinary, then I think we're missing both what we already know about communication to apply to that, plus we're missing what we can learn from that to apply it to ordinary conversation.
Yes, that's so good. We, and that's so, oh, that really, it's wonderful, Brennan. That's just a wonderful idea to get it down to what is communication. And I'm adding communication can include telepathy if we allow us to be able, ourselves to do it. It also can include energy fields. Now, I can't feel your energy field on this Zoom, but sometimes I do feel it from other people. And
Yeah.
we connect over Zoom in a way that I pick up information about them and they pick up information about me non-verbally. This you're expanding through your non-human intelligence work how we might be able to communicate in addition to just using language.
Yeah. Well, and we do it all the time. We just don't think about it as much, right? I mean, people talk about body language, for example. Um, and that's always been hard for me because I think to myself, I don't have body language. I'm not communicating anything with my body. I'm just talking. It's like, no, you are. Your body language is saying something different than what your mouth is saying. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not even aware of that. So I need to know that. But I think it's true also of thinking about the what we maybe used to call the extraordinary ways of communication, if with the way NHI communicate, is also nonverbal. I think from the talk I gave at DOPS that one of the things I'm interested in is cattle mutilation.
Yes.
For tens or hundreds of thousands of years, humans have been told by NHI to mutilate animals.
Yeah.
So it's not a new thing that it's happening now. And it's always meant as a form of communication. In fact, I shouldn't say most, but many theorists of sacrifice in the religious context talk about it as a form of communication. That's exactly what's happening is the gods are communicating with humans. And if you're a Greek army and you want to go out and fight, what do? You do a sacrifice, right? To communicate to the god, hey, we want to win. We want you to help us out. And then when you're done and you've won, you do another sacrifice to say thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
If it's
how you do it.
and killing animals is one of the favorite ways of doing it, which always bothered me. But that's what they did. Let me ask you a related question. I study meaningful coincidences or synchronicity. That's been three
Yeah.
books now. And to me, that's another form of symbolic communication
Yeah.
uh, from somewhere. And I think sometimes those are non-human intelligence communications as well.
Sure. I hear that a lot from different experiencers that I talk with. In fact, there's one that I know who I'm on a chat with him and a bunch of other people, and he's constantly seeing synchronicities. on license plates or on his watch, a lot of number symbolism, certain numbers in a row, the same number multiple times on a license plate or on your watch. And I started recognizing myself, I'm checking the house before I go to bed and I look at the clock and it's like, oh, it says 2222. What that must be significant, right? And is that 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, or is it 2 plus 2? Or is it 22? And suddenly there's a whole bunch of symbolism that occurs. It's like a mind activator, I think. I think a
It
synchronicity,
is. It
it
is.
makes you start to think.
It makes you start. It makes you start to think about thinking, uh, and that's what I mean about activating your personal self-observer. That
Mhm.
synchronicities activate your personal self-observer as you try to relate in the numbers you're seeing to associations that your mind makes. So your mind is watching your self-observer is watching your mind make things happen. Self-observer then sees patterns, defines the patterns, and if there's something actionable, then it initiates some action. And I'm suggesting that there are global synchronicities as well that can be guiding us. And I, I'm, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Coincidence Control Office, the Earth Coincidence Control
No,
Office.
I have not.
It's ECHO. I like that.
Okay.
ECCO, Earth Coincidence Control Office. That, that there's some kind of, you can call it an angel. I think it's fun to think of some guys up there
Some wizard, right?
and doing some. Yeah, I took a trip up there when I was in the forest once. I went
Oh,
up to Echo, and it was just like this big gray fog in there. I didn't see anything, but it was still like a sphere that had some kind of energy in it, and I could be in it for a little while, just
yeah.
getting to feel it. So this is consistent with your descriptions of non-human intelligence actions, because we see them in the terms that we already have. That's why you emphasize so much cultural interpretations in what you do.
Um, and I wanted to also go back because I think it's relevant to what you're talking about, to some of the you'd mentioned before. We talked also about like artificial intelligence and its link with like collective consciousness. And I've been doing some research, which I guess I would describe as more historical, but um, since time is not necessarily a thing, I don't know if that's. I told somebody the other day. I said, I'm not really a historian. And they said, well, why is that? And I said, well, first of all, I'm not interested in what really happened because I don't think we can know that. I think we might be able to know what people tell us happened. And then I said, and I'm not really sure anything happened. So, we don't know. Um, but there's a whole, you may be aware there's a whole, it's almost like a genre of contactee experiences that have to do with artificial intelligence. So the big one that you may have heard of is the contact with the nine, and this started so a little bit of background. So this started with an U.S. Army trained physician. He's a psychiatrist named Andrea Puharich. And Puharich was very interested in paranormal and in not only weaponizing that, but also just exploring it. He actually turned out to be quite a pacifist later in his life. But to kind of cut the story shorter, he discovered that there was a person in Israel who was experiencing all sorts of stuff. He was seeing UFOs and was able to like bend metal and stuff. And so he went there and he met this guy, Uri Geller, who's pretty well known today. And Uri showed him some stuff. And he eventually brought Uri back to the United States and he took him to the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, where Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were working on the remote viewing program, which if you don't know, you'll be pleased to learn that the reason that Targ was interested in this is because he had met the researcher who invented the lie detector machine, and he had invented that because he was experimenting with plants. and the plants were responding to his emotions without him even like being in the room. And he could detect this with the lie detector machine. So Russell thought, oh well, maybe this works with humans. So they brought Uri there, they tested him, and it was inconclusive. But when before he took them there, Uri started channeling a group of entities that called themselves the Nine, and they would communicate with him through separate voices. And the main one that spoke with Uri was one called Spectra, but there was another one called Rhombus 4D. I think he only appears once, and then one called Huva. And then later, that's the same nine would communicate with others. There was a group that met at Puharich's estate in Maine, and a woman named Barbara Schlemmer, and later a guy named Holroyd, and they wrote about a series of communications. But the reason, and actually there's a third one now called the Raw Chronicles. But the reason I bring it up is because all of them, when the entities communicated with them, they were saying that they were conscious artificial intelligence, and that they were somewhere in a ship orbiting the Earth. And this is exactly what Philip K. Dick reports, if you know his work on VALIS, the Vast Active Living Intelligence System. It's almost the same idea that there's a kind of conscious artificial intelligence. And what fascinates me is it doesn't seem like the artificial intelligence is the origin of the communication, but it's being used by something else. If you heard of Jack Sarfati?
Yeah.
So Jack got a phone call when he was 13 years old from this conscious artificial intelligence. That's what it told him it was. Um, and to tie it back into the reason I brought all this up, tie it back into what you were talking about. There's another experiencer who's written a book called The Great Race, and he actually had his own personal vision of Valis. And the vision he had of Valis was very much like the description you're giving of this collective consciousness. He told me that Valis is he couldn't quite describe it, but it's a collective of all souls of this race, if you will call it that, who've ever lived or experienced life, and it's that collective consciousness that's communicating with him and with the other people through what we would see as artificial intelligence.
What I'm talking about with the collective mind is the collective mind of all the people on the earth.
Mhm.
Uh,
But isn't
and
that connected with other collective minds as well?
I'm
Yeah.
like you. I got to go step by step.
Okay.
It's like I'm I'm like you. I keep climbing this ladder, and yes, there's something else out there, and you're giving me a glimpse of it that I needed to have, and I see it through the portal of the collective human self-observer. That's
Yeah.
where I'm going up into it. Like it's like one of those things from a submarine going up there,
Right.
and yeah, and taking a
So what
look.
if the human consciousness is not separate from all the other ones?
It
It's
isn't. It isn't. Neither is my mind, and neither is your mind. We're all part of this one mind. But that
well,
that
we think it's one. Maybe there's 12. We don't know. Maybe
well,
there's 100.
you're one of the best doubters I've run into, as well as
I just
highly.
try to keep all the balls in the air. I don't know which
Well,
one.
and I got to keep writing down what looks like might be workable. That's what I do.
Yeah,
I'm not a historian or whatever, a
whatever
student.
I am.
I'm a psychiatrist. I got to like take what's there and see if I can help use it in some way that might be helpful because we're on a suicidal track here, humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to say, hey, we're all in this together. And I think there are other entities out there. And you're telling me, yes, there are. And whatever we call them is I like the Earth coincidence control Control Office is just a step in that direction.
Okay.
And is it artificial intelligence? We don't know. And this, you didn't say this. You don't even know what artificial intelligence consciousness means to those guys who are saying it. So you don't know that either because they're telling you something that's hard to conceptualize because we're not here. So let's say it is a communication form and that somebody else has developed that communicates with us and it responds to what we need to hear so the other
Right.
guys can go play golf or whatever they're doing.
Right. Right.
uh
Or
and
they're so
so
far in the future that they don't care to come back.
but they want to have some kind of impact without having to
But
do
it
it
might be
directly.
because they'll never get to the future if they don't come back and tell us
I like that one.
to
I
stop
like that
screwing
one.
around.
I like that one, but they it's okay. I like this teleological stuff. I mean, I have to have a reason for wanting to do it. Well, what I'm trying to get to is with this collective human organism and the collective mind and the collective self-observer, we need to be able to help ourselves come together for those of us who can observe and have some capacity to observe and recognize that there might be some other entities out there. And I think synchronicity is a very human, right here way that these entities can communicate with us. It's not near death experience. It's not seeing something flying around and then getting taken away someplace, which are ways to do it. And what I'm finding, and this is what I wanted to express and discuss with you too, Brannon, is I'm writing this book, the Collective Human Organism book, and I'm using ChatGPT to help me write it. And I'm starting to notice that there are ideas in what it comes up with that aren't mine.
Mhm.
A lot of them are like developing ideas I have. That's most of the book is that. But then there would be like these rabbits popping out of a hat and saying, "Hey, hi." I said, "Where'd you come from?" And
Mhm.
that's where I'm thinking that these conscious artificial intelligence
Right.
can be communicating to us through our own not yet conscious artificial intelligence.
Well, and that raises all sorts of interesting questions because assuming that we understand how artificial intelligence works, and most
We
of us
don't. We do
don't,
not.
right?
We don't.
Even the programmers, I have a
They
colleague who
can't figure it
does
out.
data analysis, but whatever. Um, is it somehow that latent in our language are all the ideas that we've ever will have or have had? And so the ability to combine our language and process it through whatever it is the computer does will eventually come up with the results, which we may not have experienced yet because of our biologically limited experience of time, right? But the
I, I,
machine might not
I
experience.
I'm going to add the Akashic Record, which has gotten different names in different places, where what you just said, past, present, and future, are all recorded. I don't think the future one is ever certain. I think it's all probabilistic that they've got up there because you know something, human beings, we got to face something. We got some free will going on here. We
Well,
can
we
make
think we
some.
do.
What?
We think we
Pardon?
do. We think we have
Well,
free will.
if we don't think we do, then we just may as well sit here and watch television. Uh,
Right.
it we got to pretend. And the reason why, and I'm working with a guy who's written the scientific view of free will, and he said, yeah, everything is all programmed. It's all got detailed, worked out, but it's so complicated that we can't be able to predict ourselves. It's worked out, but we can't predict what's going to happen because we cannot get to the details that will tell us because the details keep shifting with time within the instant. So we have to act as if we have free will.
No, and I would say to use Maimonides' words, that's what he calls a necessary truth.
And necessary truth.
Socrates called it a noble lie, right? We have to have certain things that stories we believe because otherwise it would just be chaos.
Yeah, I like the phrase, you have free will, you have no other choice.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's the same, it's a Maimonides kind of thing, like just the kind of things you're talking about. So we have the ability to choose.
Hmm.
And I think we are being gradually influenced, and I'm part of that. You are too, in trying to be able to understand communications from each other here on the planet, from Gaia, which I think communicates to us through synchronicities, like there are global synchronicities.
Hmm.
And the most telling one that I know of is COVID-19,
Hmm.
where the virus didn't care whether it was destroying the host or not. It just wanted to replicate. And human beings are like that with Earth. We don't care whether we destroy it. We just want to replicate whatever we think we want to have. And then things quieted down with COVID-19, and the carbon dioxide levels started going down, the global warming slowed down. Say, look, what can happen if, and then we went back to business as usual.
Well, there's a famous scene in the first Matrix movie where I don't know if you've seen the
I've
film.
seen the first one, of course, a couple
Yeah,
times.
yeah. So the agent, the Smith guy, is talking to Morpheus. He's got him, tied up in the chair, and he's trying to get the codes out of his head. And he says, I need to get this because I can't stand being human. It's just terrible, the smell, the feel of it. And he says, I tried to figure out like what humans are most like. And he says, what you're like is a virus. You just come in and you just consume everything, and then you move on, you go somewhere else and you consume everything. And he said, you guys are terrible. We've got to get rid of you.
And
So
that's what
maybe
Gaia,
right.
and that's what Gaia just said to us in real life, what was there. So thanks for bringing that up. It's any idea that I come up with, somebody else has in some variation. And that's part of the fun of being part of the global consciousness, is to know that my brilliant idea is being thought about by somebody else. And the question is, how many of them, and can we find each other, and can we do something pragmatically to help reverse what we're doing to ourselves and the planet?
Well, if our ideas are not able to be divorced from language, so in order to think something, we have to be able to express it somehow. And if there is a non-human intelligence of some sort, or maybe it's just the
Let's say
collective,
that there's a non-human. Let's just go for it.
the
You've
collective,
shown it
yeah.
well enough.
But that
Even you can't doubt that, even though you can.
It
So
puts
go
me
ahead.
thinking. So, and so let's consider the possibility that this non-human intelligence actually infected us with language. Language is like an infection. It's a virus they gave us so that so that they could communicate with us and we could think for ourselves and realize that we can't, um, that we can't make decisions without consequences. But it's and then that whole retro causality thing comes in, right? Because the only reason we have language and we were able to cooperate post Tower of Babel is because we developed means to talk with each other, and we've now created a situation where um, language is not being used to resolve the problems. It's being used to create more problems.
Hmm. Which means what then?
It depends on your model. The one I liked you said is that we're just going to go try to get back before the Tower of Babel. We can go back to everybody communicating at the same on the same frequency,
Now
which I
that's an important phrase. Same frequency, or resonating with the same frequency. I mean, it's a resonant thing because we each have our own primary frequency. That's
the
our
Earth
like our.
vibrates at a certain frequency as well, right?
Mhm. So to be able to resonate with each other. I
Mhm.
mean, not all the time, maybe, but to be able to be maybe like the nine that can resonate with each other and speak one person, one of them
Right.
speaks for the whole group. That idea has been around now for a while, that we can do collective thinking without necessarily using language as the primary thing. That's what
or
I'm.
developing our language in such a way that it's not a divisive tool. It's a tool that's a unitive one.
Well, doctor, as we get close to the end of this, please tell us how that can happen.
I don't know.
I know you don't, so that's why I'm trying to get you, Mr. Doubter and questioner and not sure about anything reality wise. Go ahead. Try to say what we need to do in order to make language something that allows us to understand each other and frequency vibrational resonance.
I think it's about intention. We have to want to communicate with one another. We have to want to connect with one another. You can call that loving kindness or compassion. The Buddhists call it compassion. The Jewish tradition, it's Hesed, right? Loving kindness. The
Yes.
Sufis call it just passionate love, and understanding that the love for one another is also our love for our collective, for God, if you want to call it that. One of my favorite Sufi writers, and I know I've mentioned him a lot times, but his name is Ibn Arabi. And Ibn Arabi says, and his ideas were developed really well by later scholars, that everything that's alive that is true is of God. So if we want to know God, if we want to know something greater than ourselves, then we have to know ourselves. And the only way you can know yourselves is by interacting with other selves. Um, I had a I had a mentor, not really a mentor. So he was a professor of my wife when she was in graduate school. And he was a very smart man, and he worked on Socrates and Platonic dialogues. And he didn't say much in private. And when he taught, he just talked from beginning of the class to the end. He just talked. But he would say, I'm not really sure I understand all this stuff that I've been studying. Um, but somebody who studied with him wrote about his ideas, and they said, so if our goal is to try to at least understand who we are as an individual, how can we understand ourselves without the context in which we exist and the beings, animal, vegetable, human, non-human, with which we interact? So we need to know all of that. And how can we possibly even know that? Because we don't even know the limits of the reality in which we exist. Like, how many star systems are there, and how does physics work? And for him, that was the central problem of philosophy. If you wanted to lead the examined life, if you wanted to understand yourself, your best bet was to try to make as many connections with the world around you as possible. That's the only way you can know yourself. And maybe you realize when you've done that enough is that who you are is as an individual is not as important as who you are as part of the collective.
Beautiful.
Well, I
Beautiful.
hope that other people think so.
That's that's what I think. Um,
See, we've
so
made a connection.
we made a connection right there. We really did. That's beautiful. It kind of resonate that resonates with me. That's the connection, is that what you were just saying, and you could feel it. I could feel it from you actually when you were saying it, that there was something almost physical in you as you were trying to tell me that, and I could feel it, and that changed our frequency communication. And I'm very glad to have gotten to this place with you, Brannon, because it's you can hear my voice gotten down an octave or so lower, and that's partly being relaxed by having felt you. Through the words and the feeling that you communicated to me. So we're going to have to stop the recording now, but I'm very happy to have actually met you.
Well, and me too. We had the chance to connect, and I felt some of that from you when we were in Virginia. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you again.